Oh, I asked you a long way from home.
Yeah.
And you replied,
Well, home was always here, right?
yeah. So no feelings of, I wish I was home back in Australia right now?
No.
Never.
No. Never such a... How do you know, yeah? Next moment it can come.
Yeah. So it reminds me of the Paul Young song, wherever I lay my head, that's my home.
Yeah, yeah.
Is there a lot of truth in music?
Some people have, I mean, it's clear, you know, people have been touched and they express it in all kinds of forms.
Yeah.
So in music and poetry and just in walking and talking and being quiet.
So what was your first encounter with the truth?
For me it was very funny. When I was about 19, kind of by chance I ended up taking some LSD, and on that I had no background of drugs, and I wouldn't even call it drugs, I'd call it medicine. On that substance, all the doors opened up, and I had the experience of unconditional love and knowing, yeah. And so that was the first big taste, and it kind of changed the direction of my life.
But the next day after you took LSD, it was still the same?
No, it wasn't. But,
no.
but what had changed was I'd experienced something that I knew was real. Even though it was so-called induced by a substance, the knowing that happened in it, I knew was real. And for me it was like, if this is a possibility to live like this, I want to. And so that's what changed direction for me.
So you went over to the drugstore and asked for a
For
year supply of LSD?
A lifetime supply. Because up to that point I had never heard of teachers, I'd never heard of anything, I didn't know. So yeah, it was unexpected, and it was funny because other people took LSD and they didn't have that experience. They had, they saw some things, but they didn't have that recognition of, I would say, the essential nature of everything. But for me it was just my luck, and it opened up like that.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
And then came Papa G, or what was it, a long period?
Yeah, that was then, what happened for me was I could see that my thinking was distorted, and that I was seeing life through a filter. And I knew that somehow I had to start to recognize what these filters were and come out of it. I knew I had to re-examine every belief, every thought. And I didn't know how, basically, but I just knew. And I also saw my priorities had been all askew, and I knew, that sense of just being and that complete connection with everything. So, but it also set up some interesting confusions, because for years I was looking again for that experience, and so I was always measuring whether I was present by the experience that was going on. And that was one thing. When I met Papaji, he said to me, on the surface of the ocean there are waves. Deep in the ocean it's very quiet. But if you have a preference of one over the other, then you're on the shore. And so it was like, it hit me like wow, okay. So this running after any experience was a mistake, basically. To recognize that in which all experience happens, and that made a subtle but a profound shift for me.
So the seeking stopped.
Then the seeking stopped, yeah.
And how long after that you were inspired to talk to people about this?
Yeah, for me it was a funny way that it progressed, because I had been working with people, doing what I called awareness work. And up to that point, it was clear to me that ultimately all that we have is our attention to give each other, or to, that's the interface. And I could see that the habits of attention, not only where our attention was, but how our attention was focused, determined not only the experience that we had of life, but also how other people felt us. So certain, like if you're looking through a critical habit of attention, the people that are the recipient of that quality of attention, it affects their physicality.
Yeah, feel it.
Yeah, they feel it for sure. And like in families, now we know that certain qualities of attention within the family system can cause someone to be sick or depressed or suicidal. So I was recognizing that the habit of attention that was, going on in the world was not a particularly friendly one, and that it was actually causing a lot of difficulties, not only for who was, like from where the attention was coming, but also for everyone around them, especially to the people most meaningful and that you love the most. So, within the family system, the habits of attention between the parents and the kid can cause huge problems and rifts. And it has nothing to, it's just like a habit, you could say. And because it's unconscious and it's not noticed, it just continues. And then, of course, it sets up all kinds of dynamics. And so I was doing that kind of work, and was reasonably successful at that, and getting well known in newspapers and TV and stuff like that. And
Dr. Phil. The Australian Dr. Phil.
And I wasn't in Australia at that time. I was living in Hawaii. Yeah,
okay.
Maui, yeah. And then when I met Papaji, I knew that was finished. But, whenever you're traveling like that, you have to hire centers, a year in advance, and people book in and all that stuff. So I still had a few commitments. But when I showed up, I said, look, I can't do what I was doing anymore. And what people said to me was, we've gotten so much value from you over the past. If you found something better, you have to show us. And, for me, I'd just spent 3 weeks in India, and I felt completely unprepared, or I didn't know, I didn't know quite how to communicate what I'd seen being with Papaji. So I felt very insecure about it. But they said, listen, whatever it is, we want to know it. So then I started holding meetings, but
some people maybe got angry or left.
No, it was beautiful. But my plan was to finish with my commitments and go back to India to be with Papaji. And I got there, and as soon as I got there, he took me into his room and he said, you found the diamond. I want you to be available. Oh my God, I thought I could come there and, just drink a little
Relax.
deeper. Yeah, drink a little deeper. And, and then at one point, maybe because I didn't know what it was next. I just knew that what had happened up till then was over.
Yeah, but it wasn't a punishment that he said that to you.
No, but it was funny because, there was such a strong yearning to be available to truth, to this, in a way that was clean, that had nothing added, and that was where I didn't feel I could say really sure of myself, because I could see that there was still a lot of things going on in me that were unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
And I spoke to Papaji about that, and he said to me, you know where the moon is. You're just a pointer at the moon. And if you look, any finger is crooked. So don't worry about, what's going on, and you just point at the moon, because you've seen, And that was a big relief. Okay, great. So I
no more worries.
I can't say no more worries, but
about that, yeah.
Yeah, but it's like, because, it's, that's the paradox of this whole thing. It's like, you know, you can recognize that there's nobody here, that there's awareness here, and that, and yet there are these patterns that are still playing, that show up in how life lives itself, you can say like that. Really, that has nothing to do with you, but still you can watch, you know, the craziness of your system doing its dance.
Yeah.
And
isn't that the biggest mistake the searcher makes, that he thinks he can find a state in which every so-called problem dissolves and only peace all the time?
But and this is the paradox, because at any moment that you just quiet, there is no problem.
Yeah.
Okay. That's you know, it's like time and again people come to the meetings and they're involved in something that's troubling them, and the moment they quieten down, I don't tell them, they tell me, oh, it's no problem. Nothing, here everything is fine. But then usually the comment is, yes, but then when I go home and I say, well, you know, you're talking about the past because you don't know what's going to happen when you go home. But the fact is that for many people, when they do go home, their habits reassert, and then they find themselves in similar difficulties, except that there's a difference, that they know that when there's just a resting with the attention in awareness, there is no problem. Mm-hmm. And you know, that's a luck. That's a deep luck, because for many people, in that recognition, what happens is, it's like Pandora's box has been opened. Everything that has been suppressed starts to come up.
Yeah.
And in some ways people feel a lot worse than they did before, because what was not visible starts to become visible. But it's just a natural process. It does its thing. And yeah, you know, like, it's interesting, because what happens, it seems, is that for some people there's a way of taking an enlightened perspective at that point, where there's this, you know, some people call it inviting everything away. They say, you know, look, it's not real, you don't have to trouble with it.
You invite a shuffle.
They invite a shuffle, yeah. It's like, okay. So, you know, it's okay, but in a sense, what happens is those patterns keep troubling. And so there are some recognition, some seeings that make that easier. And one of them is the truly investigating and seeing, okay, there's patterns going on, and these patterns are happening, and then really questioning deeply who's doing them all, you know, who's responsible for them, because usually the idea is, you know, I'm responsible for it, it's me.
Yeah.
Because those patterns show up as a sense of me. They are the sense of me.
It's who I am.
Yeah, and or it produces the sense of separation, the sense of identity.
Yeah.
But nobody's doing it. So when life is looking through those patterns, it feels like there's a me that's doing it. But when you really start to look and see, okay, where did these patterns come from? Look, they come from conditioning. Where did that conditioning come from? Maybe people say my parents, my culture. Okay, but where did that come from?
Yeah.
And then you start going back. You see, well, we don't know. So who's responsible?
No one to blame.
No one to blame. So that's a very critical thing, because what happens is when, you know, we're living our life, and then somehow something touches us, and there's some sense that everything isn't okay. It's like, that's the feeling, yeah? I'm not okay, the world's not okay, life's not okay.